It wasn't that many years ago that the Kanawha River was essentially dead, unable to sustain any aquatic life. But the Kanawha, like many other rivers since the passage of the Federal Clean Water Act, is also a river in recovery. Most summer days, you'll find the Kanawha River full of people boating, fishing, or just out relaxing and enjoying the water. But that's not always been the case, and it's something that's still in the minds of longtime residents of the Kanawha Valley.
You know, when you get down below Charleston, the canal was really a mess. It actually stinks.
I don't see why they can't clean it up. After all, they have enough brains to figure out how to make those new detergents and those fancy plastics. Why can't they figure out a way to clean up their water instead of dumping all that stuff back into the Kanawha? It's a disgrace.
In his 1962 documentary, Crisis on the Kanawha, filmmaker Stuart Finley detailed the pollution common to the Kanawha River.
This is the ugly end of the Charleston complex. It is a cluster of chemical manufacturing plants along the banks of the Kanawha River in West Virginia. Submerged pipes draw river water into the plants. Intriguing, often secret processes take place as chemicals and synthetics are made. And then comes the great payoff. The used water is turned back into the river with a little extra bonus of contamination for good measure.
I think the biggest problem was summertime, the river, from all the industrial waste and municipal waste that were being discharged into the river. They have an oxygen demand, and basically that waste would pull the oxygen out of the water, and that caused fish kills in the summer. So every summer in the Kanawha back in the late 50s and 60s, there were fish kills in the river. And I recall a story, one of the gentlemen that has since retired, one of his first jobs, he told me, was to go to the river and scoop up the dead fish basically and haul them away so they didn't stink, and that was in the Dunbar area. Another gentleman told me that he was a kid and he grew up here in Charleston, that every summer they would go to the bridge over the Elk River and watch the catfish come up sucking for air.
And here's why. Water samples taken throughout the summer of 1963 showed no dissolved oxygen, zero, in the Kanawha River. Today it's a different story. You'll still find industries along the banks of the Kanawha, but what you won't find is untreated water being pumped back in. That's thanks to the Clean Water Act of 1972 that set into motion a way to clean up the nation's polluted streams and waterways.
It gave us two tools that are very powerful. One is it gave us permitting authority so we could regulate what was coming out of people's discharge pipes. And the other, it gave us an ability to help municipalities fund their wastewater treatment plants. First there was grants given to municipalities to fund treatment, and now it's a loan program. Those two major initiatives, combined with states given the authority to set water quality standards, basically to set goals for their water bodies. So if you have standards, you have something you want, a threshold that you meet that you know will provide for aquatic life, then you've got a basis to set your permit limits on from any facility, whether it's a factory or an industrial plant or a city wastewater treatment discharge.
It's taken a lot of time, money, and hard work, but those efforts are paying off. Scott Manderola is Deputy Cabinet Secretary and Director of the DEP Division of Water and Waste Management, and an avid angler who has seen the changes in the Kanawha firsthand.
I moved to the state of West Virginia in 1994, and when I first moved here, I was a fisherman, mostly trout at the time. I did a lot of bass fishing too, but mostly in smaller rivers. I talked to a bunch of folks and tried to ask people, do you fish the Kanawha? And at that point in time, although it was becoming much cleaner, most people were discouraged from fishing the Kanawha River. They didn't feel it was very clean. That's changed dramatically since that point in time. Back during the 50s and 60s, some of the outfalls along the Kanawha River, and it would not even be recognizable in comparison to what you're looking at today. The outfalls prior to the Clean Water Act were relatively unregulated. Industry dumped their waste products into the river pretty much, again, unregulated, without too much concern for the river itself. Now, the discharges, as we see some of these along the river now, are completely regulated with NPDES permits that are required to meet water quality standards. And by doing that, the water quality standards are designed to protect the use of the river. And the primary Clean Water Act uses are fishable, swimmable, which means you need to protect all the aquatic species in the river, as well as the capability to use it as a resource for recreational use, swimming, boating, that type of activity.
Within the last few years, the state legislature passed a provision in the water quality standards to allow the first 72 miles of the Kanawha River to be used as a drinking water source again. Before the Clean Water Act and its standards came into play, the first 72 miles of the river weren't fit to use as a drinking water source.
Part of the reason for that was the condition at the river at that time really didn't support the use as a drinking water source because of the discharges and the level of pollution in the river at that time. But that has changed so dramatically that at this point in time, the river both below and above that 72-mile mark is more than sufficient quality to be used as a drinking water source.
There are still problems to be addressed, problems like combined sewer overflows and stormwater runoff, and the lingering effects of toxic pollutants like dioxin, PCBs, and mercury. But the Kanawha today is a model of how regulators, industries, and municipalities can work together to bring about a positive change.